it's not that we need to experience nature. It's not that we need to spend time in nature. It's that we are nature. We are integrated into a natural world. Whatever it is that you do in your life, I think if that can be a core piece of your identity, we are like collectively moving towards this healing that I have the hope for, that our species will survive on this planet in a peaceful and healthy way.
The Urban Exodus podcast shares the wisdom, wit, and stories of those who decided to embark on the road less traveled, to pursue their own interpretation of the good life. Small business owners, change makers, artists, farmers, and more, working towards building a better future for themselves and their fellow citizens. The people I've met through this project give me energy and hope for a better future. May their inspirational words and practical advice embolden and guide you on your own journey. This podcast is for country dreamers, rural folk, and urban dwellers alike who want to feel more connected to the natural world and the purpose and choices in their lives. I'm Melissa Hessler. Welcome to the Urban Exodus. Urban Exodus is a labor of love and is only made possible by listener support. To support our programming, please consider making a listener contribution or joining our Patreon community for access to bonus features, rapid-fire interviews, videos, and so much more. I'm excited to invite you to my conversation with Molly Nakahara. Molly is a farmer and the Farm Institute director at the nonprofit Sierra Harvest. She has also worked to support farmers through the UC Cooperative Extension and as a member of the EcoFarm Board of Directors. Molly grew up in the Bay Area, but she moved with her partner to Grass Valley in 2010 to build Dinner Bell Farm, which offers certified organic flowers and pasture-raised pork. Molly's paternal grandparents farmed lettuce and green onions in Salinas, California, before they were imprisoned at a Japanese internment camp during World War II, and their land was confiscated. After the war, her family continued to grow for themselves on a small city allotment, and this nurtured her passion for growing food and flowers. For Molly, farming has been a radical act of connecting with her ancestors and continuing her family's farming legacy that was previously cut short by racism and xenophobia. In our conversation, we speak about the difficulties small-scale farmers face when it comes to land access and climate uncertainty, reconnecting with ancestral legacy, the tremendous power of small radical acts of kindness, and so much more. This is a story about healing through the soil, being a good neighbor, the emotional value of philanthropy, and embracing beauty for its own sake. All right, so I am very excited to have on the podcast today Molly Nakahara, and Molly is one of the owners of Dinner Bell Farm, based in the Grass Valley region of California. And I met Molly, I want to say it was 2018, maybe. We came to visit and tour your farm, and it was so wonderful to meet you. And we talked about so many things while we were there. And it's such an honor to get to have you on this newest kind of iteration to tell your own story in your own words. So thanks so much for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me. This is such a treat for me.
Awesome. Well, first off, I would love if you shared a little bit of your personal backstory, where you grew up, and the paths that you've taken that have led you to where you are now.
Great. I grew up in the San Francisco Bay Area in the East Bay, so across the bay from San Francisco. And my parents grew up in that same area. And so I was many generations urban. Had a great childhood, loved the Bay Area, still such a core place in my life. And my parents were very connected to the outdoors. So we spent a lot of time camping in the Sierras and camping on the coast, and just even in our own backyard. Just being outdoors was something that was important to my family. And somewhere along the way, we connected to this region, Grass Valley. Neighbors of ours moved here when I was maybe 6, and we continued to stay in touch with them. And so I actually grew up sort of running around here on those neighbors still live next door here in Grass Valley. And
No way.
I grew up sort of connected to this place, though I never knew I would end up here. And I got interested in sort of outdoor education, which led me to garden-based nutrition education and gardening. And so food gardening has always been something very important and just a habit that I need to have in my life for my own sanity. And that slowly led me down the path after college to learning more about agriculture and wanting to be more engaged with agriculture. And so after growing up in the Bay Area, doing my undergraduate studies there, and then working for a decade engaged with sort of urban agriculture, my partner and I decided to move here to Grass Valley, where we had some connection, and started our own little farm, Dinner Bell Farm. And we have been living in Grass Valley, running a small farm for the past 12 years. We started farming in 2010. Wow, so long ago. And, things have evolved and changed as they always do. And so we're farming a little bit less, but I'm still living here in Grass Valley. And yeah, that's a bit like the nutshell of where I am. And of course, we can dive into it a little bit more. But
you talked a little bit about it just in your description, but I think that a lot of people who come to farming as, they've already gone down kind of a career trajectory and they come to farming, it can feel so daunting in the beginning to figure out, how do you make a living as a farmer? How do you incorporate off-farm jobs? How do you feel like you're a farmer even with an off-farm job? There's kind of like an identity crisis there, because small-scale farming, often you kind of either have like one person's income propping it up, or you're doing off-farm jobs. And I wondered what that looks like for you and what it has looked like for you from kind of the beginning to now.
Yeah, sure. So when we started farming, we had sort of worked for years and saved money because we knew we were going to have to capitalize a farm business. Part of the choice of coming to Grass Valley is that my family already owned a small piece of land here. And so using that, family support, that's the sort of modern day family farm it looks a little different than it may be used to in the past. And so, relying on sort of family support, and saved enough money that initially we were able to farm with another farmer as well. So it was my partner, Paul, and our friend Cooper. We farmed full time for the first few years, and we really sort of threw everything at it. And it was a grind. It was amazingly challenging. It's just you hear farmers say this, like, if you've farmed for 10 years, you've only done it 10 times because you just have that one season. You have to make all your choices. You have to follow through with your plan, and hopefully it works out. And oftentimes it doesn't work out, or big pieces of it don't work out, and you have to adjust your plan for the next season. And so, the beauty of farming is you're so tied to the cycles of planet Earth. You're not apart from, you're sort of forced into submission by the seasons and whatnot. And so, yeah, we farmed full time for a while, and then, life happened, and Cooper moved, and we had a baby, and our income needs changed, and we needed something that was a little bit more reliable. And so we started working off the farm maybe in year 3 or 4. And the beauty of farming is that you are rich in many things. You may not have a lot of income, but you have amazing food, and we farmed from our home. And so a lot of our living expenses were sort of business expenses as well. And so your cost of living can decrease. You end up subsidizing your business with a lot of unpaid labor. And that just seems to be pretty standard for the first few years of farming. It's such a risky business venture that it's hard to find investors or people who are willing to give you that capital to start up your business, unlike maybe other sectors of the economy. So, once we started working off farm, I started working in sort of the ag support world. And so I was working with our local cooperative extensionists to support other farmers. And now for the past many years, I've been working with a local nonprofit that sort of supports the food system in lots of ways, and running programs to support farmers. Still very engaged in agriculture. Sorry, there's chickens behind me.
I love it. No, it's perfect.
My husband is a organic farm inspector, so he helps farms certify organic. And, so it's nice that we've been able to find jobs that kept us in agriculture. But the nature of small farming is that it really takes a lot of hands and a lot of oversight and a lot of management. And so it's been a constant sort of push and pull of wanting our farm to succeed and wanting to invest enough time and energy into it to build it to something that could sustain even a part-time income for us, and also having these off-farm opportunities that are enticing in other ways. And so it's always been a balance. And right now we're going through a little bit of a period of what does it feel like for us to work more off the farm and really scale the farm back significantly, mostly just to sort of feel like, what is it like to have a summer where we don't have to, wake up and feed the pigs every day, or where we don't have to make that big payment to the feed company every month and have, just to see what it's like. I mean, we love farming. It's, as so many of my fellow farmer friends and I joke, it's a compulsion. Once you start, you truly cannot stop. Though I like to always remind people there's just so many ways to be engaged in agriculture, and homesteading and growing a huge food garden and raising some of your own animal proteins, like that is also a very worthwhile, noble, venture. You don't have to earn your living from farming. It's possible. You have to work very hard and you have to be a very savvy business person to do it. So at this point, we're seeing what it's like to explore these sort of off-farm things. And we have an 8-year-old and he has a life that pulls us off the farm. And so there's soccer games and play dates and birthday parties and mountain biking. And we want to be able to do that stuff and with him as well. And so, who knows what it'll be. I mean, I think a thing we are reminding ourselves as well is that even if our occupation is not necessarily full-time farming, we can come back to it next season. Like every December is an opportunity to sort of hit the reset button and go back to it if we want.
Yeah. I mean, I think that a lot of small scale farmers grapple and battle with exactly what you are in the process of, because I think people go into farming. A lot of times it's altruistic to go into farming. You're doing it because you are growing food for your community. It feels good. It feels like a career with purpose, and also a career that's very connected to nature, which is so appealing. But then it's the grind. It's the never being able to leave your farm. And even by scaling back and still being involved in agriculture in really powerful ways, quite honestly, the work that you both do off farm is so powerful and really does make change in our food systems in a way that is kind of larger than growing food for your community. And you still can kind of provide that, but at a more manageable scale. I think it's wonderful that you're exploring those options and that advice to other farmers who also maybe feel that push-pull of, can I really call myself a farmer if I only do this thing? And the answer is yes.
Yeah, it's interesting. There's so much, it is a lifestyle choice. And so there's so much like identity and therefore, pride and humility wrapped up into it. I remember being in my 20s and feeling as if the only path forward was for me to start my own farm. And I wish I had been a little bit more aware of the huge need in small community-based agriculture for people who are willing to be farm managers and people who want to, go to the farmer that started 20 years ago and say, hey, what's your plan for the future? Because that's what our food system needs. We need this legacy of farmers taking on the stewardship of the land and the place-based knowledge that gets established. That is sort of the family farm of past, right? It was this generational thing that people, for better or for worse, had no choice, couldn't get out of, even if they wanted to. And so that's like a big piece of advice I have to a lot of people who want to get into agriculture. Like, go farm with the farmers that are established, because they need you and they want you to take over their business. You'll earn an income. They'll pay you to be their manager. You'll get to use all their cool stuff. It's not impossible, but starting off on your own is a very big challenge. So
Absolutely. Well, I know that you initially farmed with a couple who actually is the reason that I met you guys. And there's a lot of discussion right now about the power of the collective for small scale growers. And I'd love for you to offer any advice on ways for people to kind of think outside the box on getting some sort of farm business or collective going in the power of collaboration over individual pursuit.
Yeah, I think it is a vital piece of, agriculture. It's the definition of agriculture is around a shared system of practices and knowledge that we as a society collectively engage in. And so I think that is exactly right. We need to sort of break down this individual nuclear family, private property fences structure and try and do things more collectively, because it is too hard it's impossible for us to do it on our own. And truly the economic systems don't support us to do it either. And so, I think words of wisdom in our own experience, you can never invest too much in relationship and understanding the personalities that are involved and really creating a business structure and a work-life balance that honors all of the individuals that are involved. And I know there's a lot of resources out there, whether or not you're creating a cooperative business structure or not. There's great resources for that if you do want to create a cooperative business structure, but just going into a land-based operation with other people. All of farming is about relationship. It's about relationship with your customers. It's about relationship with your neighbors. It's about relationship with your land and your animals. And so you just cannot invest too much in those relationships, because those are what are going to sort of see everything through. And so that's a big piece of advice, really take the time to make sure that everybody's good when you're going forward as a group. And then, I think even if you are, starting off you want to start a farm on your own, or you want to manage a piece of land, who are the other people in your network? Everyone has a skill set that can support it, whether it's web design or, even now we have just days where we ask my family to come up and help us with big projects. We just had a big storm and all of these trees fell and all these branches fell. And so just can you come and haul branches and help us do a few burn piles? And, calling on people to be involved is really important. And there are some really cool models out there of much more sort of formalized collectivization of agriculture and small farmers. And those are inspiring. And it's going to be fun to see sort of what those yield for our food system.
Absolutely. Not only our food system, but also our sense of community and our sense of resilience, especially as we're moving into this kind of unknown territory with climate. And I also wondered, just as a farmer, as somebody who has been so intimately connected with the land for so long and has lived on your piece of land now for almost a decade, what have you noticed in regards to climate change?
It's massive. It's every day we're aware of it. Just with drought and, when we first moved here a decade ago, there were grumblings of, there used to be a huge fruit production region. There used to be a lot of stone fruit production in the foothills of the Sierra, and spring weather patterns have become so unpredictable that you just cannot rely on having a crop. You might have really unseasonably warm weather like we're having now. And then if it hails or freezes again, you lose your crop, and so we were hearing about that a little bit, and now we've watched it play out in real time. And the truth is, we just don't know. I think a lot of people are experiencing this. You don't know what to expect. It's been 75 degrees and then it froze, and then we had a crazy snowstorm, and now we're on record to have the driest start to a year in recorded history. So we are seeing that weather patterns are not there is no pattern to the weather. The sort of catastrophic implication for us is now catastrophic wildfire due to so many different factors, climate change being one of them, forest management being another, the genocide of indigenous cultures and the loss of traditional ecological knowledge. And so that's been a big passion of mine recently, is just re-engaging with fire in this ecosystem and learning that fire is not, it is a part of this land. all of the native plants need it. This is a fire-dependent ecosystem, but the way that we have suppressed fire and managed the forest and logged and cut down all the old growth has resulted, and climate change now, drought, has resulted in these catastrophic fires, which are just devastating, but they're the forest's way of sort of hitting the reset button. So I'm part of this network of landowners and different people now that are learning about like the reapplication of prescribed fire to your land and getting to the point where, you know, we can learn from the communities and cultures that are so tied to this landscape. They now reference the forest before colonization. They call it the cultural forest because it was so tied to human activity. And it was a very different forest. It was 40 trees per acre. Now we live in a forest where there's like 250 trees per acre. So it's been this just really fascinating. And I think this is what climate change is leading us to. And we all have to engage in this. Like there's just this new set of knowledge. There's this new set of practices. And we need to be like running at it full steam because not only do we have to mitigate the climate crisis, but we also have to be engaged in solutions. And so many of those solutions like are ours to manage. They're not, no one else is going to do this for us.
You know, you talk about the blend of old and new. These are indigenous practices. Like we managed and tended to the land for thousands and thousands of years before we, you know, kind of exploited the land and saw it as like resource versus regeneration and like maintaining.
We were the land. It wasn't that the land was a commodity. And that's where we're at now. It's, you know, everything is commodified. Everything is about money now. And that's just messed it all up in a big way.
You know, I remember you sharing this story when I visited about the early days of your farm. You focused first on chickens. And I remember you said that like all of a sudden you just realized how many predators there were in California, hawks and owls, and you guys were doing anything possible to protect the chickens. But now you've simplified it to bacon and blooms. So I'd love for you to kind of talk about like that story, because I thought that story was, you know, it might speak to some early farmers that are feeling like they're licking their wounds. And then, you know, okay, we're focusing here and this is what works.
First, I just really want to appreciate that you've grabbed onto my tagline, #bacon and blooms. I love that. So I guess, you know, the moral of the story is don't try and like square peg round hole. Like don't try and superimpose your vision or idea onto the land. You really have to understand what constraints, what parameters might be existing, and that truly those are your like, those are opportunities. Those are the things that are going to help you develop a niche and find a great product that's going to thrive. And I mean, I think that points again to like farming with people who have been stewarding land ahead of you, because it just takes seasons to go through these things and understand what opportunities exist. So yeah, exactly. We were raising chickens and, you know, everyone likes chicken. It's just, that's how it goes. And they're like not very smart and they're very like meaty and just easy to grab a hold of. And so we were supporting it. We like joke it was our land tax. We were just supporting this vast wildlife community with an all-you-can-eat chicken buffet. And it was one of those things we didn't really realize until the very end of the season when we like tallied all of our numbers. And there was this huge difference in the amount of chickens we thought we had and the ones that we had actually ended up bringing to market. So yeah, so, you know, what we had to do, and I think what a lot of us small producers who are in these more marginal landscapes where we don't have the ability to sort of get to large scale and high efficiency, you know, it's more of a patchwork quilt and it's a lot of being sort of a farmer inventor to make your products thrive. We started to zero in on things that did really well, where like they survived and they could grow. And then there were things that we really enjoyed doing and there were markets for them. So those like three things coming together of like products that the land could support, that was crucial. So pigs, we found that in the way that we raise pigs, which is sort of in these big open paddocks that, they're moving across the landscape. We've never lost a pig to a predator. We have heard of people losing pigs to bears. It's not unheard of to lose a pig to a bear or a mountain lion, but it's far less frequent because pigs are very smart and they're very big and scary and tough. And then, with the flower, and so we had market for pork. We did take them to San Francisco for years and years. That was our main market, and COVID actually bottomed that one out because the restaurants all closed. So we've had to kind of reinvent the pork sales a little bit. And flowers were another one where we could produce sort of a high volume in a small space. And there's a lot of flexibility in flowers because if you lose one type of flower, there's generally another one that can sort of fill its space. And being such close proximity to Tahoe, that was a really good market for flowers, just both like in terms of farmers market sales and as well as event sales, people getting married up in the Lake Tahoe area. So that was a good lesson learned for us. And I think you have to specialize if you're going to be a small farmer. You really have to figure out what is the thing that you're doing. And that might be a CSA for your community that grows lots of different crops, but then you need to become a CSA specialist. You can't be doing all kinds of stuff. So
I love that you settled on flowers, and you told me when we were there that your grandmother actually was a very talented, I hope I'm going to pronounce this right, Ikebana artist. The art of making flowers alive, which I think is the most beautiful description of floral artistry. I wondered if your passion developed when you were young for flowers and flower arranging, or did it develop later on? And how does that make you feel connected to your ancestors in like your day-to-day?
Yeah. My passion for flowers did develop early, but I did not know that. So when I first started farming, I think we were talking about this earlier, I was so driven by my values and like growing food for the community, and anything else was not worth the time. And it was, and so I thought flowers were this unnecessary product, and they really like bothered me in the beginning of my farming career. But I kept like coming back to them. I kept like wanting to grow them, and I kept expanding more and more and learning more about design. And I think at a certain point I realized, like I love this. I'm pretty good at it. And I have this whole deep history with flowers. So it was actually my great-grandmother who immigrated from Japan and was a farmer in Salinas, so sort of like Watsonville, Salinas area of California, the salad bowl of America. She had a green onion and lettuce farm before World War II, and then Japanese internment camps sent them, they lost the farm, they all were imprisoned. They all then moved into they moved to Berkeley, California, and all jammed into this 16 people lived in a 2-bedroom house. But they had a huge lot. They had this giant lot in the backyard, and it was an amazing farm. They grew all their food and flour, just tons and tons of stuff. And so my great-grandmother was an Ikebana artist, and I've heard that she grew like chrysanthemums the size of your head. I've yet to someone says there's a photo, I need to find it. But, she would enter into competitions, and I've inherited a few of these really cool Ikebana vases that she would use. And so then my grandmother, my bachan, also grew flowers. And my memories of her as a child were, she'd drive over to our house. We lived maybe 10 minutes across town. She'd get out of her car and she'd have this huge armload of gladiolas or irises or chrysanthemums, just giant, wrapped in newspaper. So every time we saw her, she would bring us armloads of flowers that she had grown herself in her backyard. And then in Japanese culture, there's a really important, you tend to people's grave sites called haka. And so you always bring fresh flowers to the grave site. And so that was a huge piece of what she did, because my grandfather died when I was, a teenager. My grandmother outlived him for decades. And so she grew all these flowers in her yard so that she could bring flowers to his grave site. And so, I think, once I kind of embraced that flowers held this really important emotional space in my own history, I was able to let them in and realize, you know what, this is important. Beauty is important. Flowers are how we express emotion. It's one of the ways that we send cards and we send flowers, like words and this object. And so, that felt really important. And the more we put flowers out into the world, the more we saw evidence of that. So people getting married, people having babies, people dying. Flowers are part of our life in all of these really emotionally significant moments. And it felt really special to get to be present in people's lives in that way. And so I was able to come full circle and recognize that flowers are important, and flowers create amazing habitat, and flowers are an okay thing to grow. And, the flowers you buy at the grocery store are incredibly toxic. And so it's creating a much more sustainable alternative for lots of people.
I just wanted to give an enormous thank you to all of the listeners who have made contributions towards the production of this podcast. Every season, I spend about 100 hours preparing, writing, editing, interviewing, sketching, distributing, and I have hard costs for my editor and hosting fees. It means so much to me that you find enough value and meaning in this work to pledge your support to keep it going. If you haven't had a chance to contribute, we've made it really easy. Just click the support button on the top of urbanexodus.com and pledge any amount that you like. Or join the Urban Exodus Patreon community. Thank you again. I feel so lucky to be a part of the amazing global community that this project has manifested. Your family's history of being removed from their farm because of their Japanese heritage. What does it mean to you to carry on that legacy and to rebuild, that generational legacy of farming and being a steward of the land?
It is a great honor and privilege, truly, to do it. I mean, as is often the story with immigrant or, lower resource people whose first path into the economy and society is in farming, like a land-based, toiling away to create a product. There is somewhat of a pressure to get off the farm, get the kids off the farm. And so I grappled with that a little bit. So my great-grandparents immigrated, my grandparents grew up on the farm. There was a lot of pressure on them. And this is a sort of fallout from the war as well and racism, but there was a huge amount of pressure on them to become sort of high achieving professionals in society, which they all did. And our generation is the generation that has the luxury, the hard won luxury and safety to have more choice in how we exist in the world. And I am so keenly aware of that. I don't make a lot of money as a farmer. I am sort of healing a wound in my generational history that being on the land, which we were, all of the Japanese internment camps, if you look at it, they were all in these desolate, freezing, dry, high desert places. And in some ways it was by design. At the time of internment, 80 years ago, 40% of the farms in California, 40% of the food producing farms in California were controlled or owned by Japanese American people. So it was a very land-based community. There was recently an article published about the environmental racism of internment that sort of highlighted this and looked at some sort of statements. And there was this quote by a person who had been a farmer, and it was something like, "We were sent away when the first roses were budding on the plants." It was just so stark and powerful how we were taken from the land. And, I honor that every day, that we have this opportunity to heal and to reconnect and to be on the earth and to be on the land and to grow food for the community. And, my cousin is also engaged in agriculture. There's a number of us in this generation who have kind of gone full circle back to the land. And we thought that our parents would not want us to, they want us to be financially stable, et cetera, et cetera. But I can't tell you the times that my aunts and uncles and my parents have said how proud and excited my grandparents would be that we're farming, because they loved it. They love farming and they were good at it.
I really appreciate you for so many reasons, Molly, but I love the Flowers for Hospice program that you've developed. And it really speaks to, this idea of the real value in flowers and the compassion. And I wondered if you could speak a little bit more about how you came up with the idea and the impact it's had on people and their families nearing the end of life.
Yeah, Flowers for Hospice, it's really the best thing we've ever done. And we love it. It wasn't my idea, it was my husband Paul's idea. So let's give him full credit for that. We had not always, but for years, we've donated excess flowers to hospice. I don't know really maybe a neighbor suggested that to us one time, and it just seemed like an easy thing to do. And so if we had extra bouquets from market or here and there, we'd have a bucket of flowers. We would bring them to Hospice of the Foothills. And during the pandemic, when suddenly all of our markets were so uncertain, weddings were being canceled. We didn't know if the farmers markets were going to be open. And we knew that there was this sort of like isolation and grief being experienced by so many people. And then just this heartbreaking idea of like not being able to see our vulnerable loved ones who, the image of people sort of dying alone was just something we couldn't handle. And so Paul thought like, maybe people want to support us to do this. Like we had committed, like we're going to bring flowers to hospice so that the nurses can bring these flowers. We want these flowers to be, at the bedsides of some of the most vulnerable people in our community. And then we had the idea like, well, maybe other people want to just support us to do that. And so we then opened up sales like a CSA, basically, where people could buy one or buy a season of bouquets and they could do that in honor of a loved one. And we got supporters from across the country. I mean, we just like put a button on the website and sort of shared it with our community and on social media. And we earned enough income support so that we could keep our employee on and she could, harvest and make and deliver these weekly bouquets to our local hospice. And it was just it was so heartening to know that lots of people, when given the opportunity to just do a totally random act of kindness for another person, like seize the opportunity. And, it kind of goes like, if we put it out there, if we do a lot of promoting and sales, we get people supporting the program. But right now it's just kind of in a passive, like it's on our website. People can support us if they want. We're going to do the Flowers for Hospice no matter what, because it has also now turned into this thing that's so special for the local hospice. Like they put us on the cover of their annual report, and like is a little picture of my son delivering the bucket of bouquets and his COVID mask. And it just has become this thing that's it like pays us in this other way. So whether or not we get financial support for it, we're going to keep doing it because it just feels so great. And, if we want to scale it up and get other people to support us, then we have that option too.
And what an amazing gift to pass down to your son, to have that experience of, I don't know, I think that we kind of hide away from death in a lot of ways and don't kind of confront it and don't want to deal with the hard parts of it. One of my best friends is a hospice nurse, and COVID has been incredibly difficult for her because typically with hospice, you have your family around you. And during COVID, that was not allowed. And so it was really just her and people in their end of life dealing with just the complexities of emotions and the feeling of isolation, and just to have like a beautiful bouquet of flowers sitting there that you could focus on. What a gift. I just love it.
Yay. Thank you for asking about it. It's
absolutely.
And I hope that your friend, has a lot of support around her, because that was part of it too, is we wanted we knew that was this experience these nurses and care providers were having, and to like be able to walk through the door with this bright, positive thing, to be the one who delivers this into this ray of sunshine into the home, that is just as comforting, and supporting that community of people is just as important as supporting the people who are dying.
Absolutely. And I mean, I think that when I was little, one of the jobs that I wanted to do was like a flower delivery person, just because you're like the person that everybody's excited to see. So you had your son when you first started farming, or basically right thereafter. And I wondered if you had any advice for farmers who want to have children, but they're worried about making enough to support a growing family or having enough bandwidth to keep their farm business running.
Yeah, it takes a huge amount of adjustment, and it's great though. I mean, raising a kid on a farm is just, or on land, it's just the best thing ever. Like, you just see how it's part of who we are to be on the earth every day. You know, you just get to witness that, and it reminds you of so much of what's really important. So, I mean, and just little weird things like before my kid could even talk, he had a mental map of our farm and the surrounding property of all the edible plants. Like, I remember my mother-in-law would come visit, and he'd take her on this walk, and he'd be eating things all along the way. She was terrified, like, it's poisonous, don't eat that, you know? But he knew, like, oh, the miner's lettuce is here, the mulberry tree's over there, and the raspberries are over there. It was just like so cool to see how quickly that like foraging instinct is just part of who we are. So, you know, there's a lot of joy, there's a lot of magic, but there is, you know, it's not, I don't think it's dissimilar to being just working and having a child as well. Like, you have to figure out, how is your kid being cared for if you aren't the one who can care for them? And the nice thing about farming is that a lot of people are able, certainly in that first year or up to 2 years, a lot of people bring their children with them to farm. And you maybe can't work quite as efficiently as you did. And you have to, you know, you're not like tasked with things that have to get done, but there's a lot of side projects that have more flexible timelines, and your kid can help and be involved. You know, we wanted our son to understand that living takes work. So there's chores and there's jobs that we have to do, but we didn't want him to sort of like have to be a farmer because we were farmers. And so we tried to just create space for it to be more playful and fun. And, you know, we utilized daycare, and we asked neighbors to take care of our son. And we had, you know, little like parent helpers, like little, you know, kids who were maybe not old enough to babysit, but they were old enough to make sure he didn't wander off into the pond, sort of be there to keep an eye on him. So we utilized sort of a lot of different ways. And, you know, now he's in school. And so it happens pretty quick. So I would say, you know, don't be deterred. Just be ready to be super flexible. And in all things, ask for help. Just ask, always ask for help.
That is the best parenting advice regardless, but also very like targeted towards farming, which is totally true. And I've seen it in so many young farmers or young parent farmers. I know that COVID has really inspired an influx of people to relocate to rural areas in the US. And that has caused these enormous real estate price jumps in small communities that had previously had much lower costs of living. And I know that that's happened in your area. And I wondered what those economic population shifts have kind of looked like. Is there animosity? Is there integration? And any advice that you had for new arrivals on ways to better weave themselves into the fabric of their new community and not be an outsider?
Yeah. I mean, there's always been this movement of people, both probably into cities and out of cities. And no one truly can like hold, unless you're an Indigenous person, I don't think you can really claim place, you know, in the way that. So I'm pretty open about it. I think probably other people, I understand sort of the grumblings and the challenges. And I certainly, I mean, I grew up in the Bay Area. And so I get like, the minute I decided that I wanted to be like anything that wasn't in tech, I was basically priced out of my community. So that was something I experienced like in the city as well. And you know, it's had an impact on us. Like, we don't own, and we are priced out of owning currently. We'd have to choose a different path to earn a different type of income to be able to buy sort of the sort of what we rent now to buy that. We could buy something much smaller and different, and so, that feels hard, but I don't necessarily lay that at anyone's feet. I think the thing that is important about moving to a new place, and I experienced this myself, is there is a different way of doing things in that new place where you're going. And it's really important. You don't have to prescribe to that new way, but you should just sit back a little bit and really observe in a sort of quiet way before passing any kind of judgment or trying to superimpose a different thing. You will blend with your neighborhood and your community, and you will add your own sort of cultural contribution to that. But there is like this old guard. There is a sense of this is how we live here, and it's not all bad. And so just like being really sort of observant for a little while, I think is so important. And I always tell this to everyone, like, drive slowly. If you're moving to a rural place, drive slowly. Like, I remember coming here and like my road is a 10-mile-an-hour road. I remember feeling like that it was excruciating. Like, because when you're in the city, driving 25 feels slow. And 25 on a gravel road, no, people will hate you.
Yeah,
so
it's true.
And there's a reason. It's like there's dust, and there's a reason we are asked to drive slow. So drive slowly, and then, be a good neighbor. You're going to probably, no matter where you move, it could be super progressive. There's going to be like political differences in your neighborhood, and all kinds of flags are flying and bumper stickers. And when it comes down to it, you're just neighbors and you're living in the same place, and it's as close as we're going to get to kind of a village mentality. And so look after each other and exchange numbers and, check up on each other, especially when there's some sort of disaster happening. And that those networks will benefit you in insane ways if you tap into them and engage with them. You're not going to be like the people that are around you. And in cities, because of the sea of humanity, we're so able to like isolate into our little bubbles of likeness, which is fine. I get it. But when you move to like a place where there's less population, like you don't really have that option anymore. You have to just kind of go with the people that are around you, and you'll be so rewarded, I think, by being open to just being a human being with everybody else. I mean, for example, with our son Yoshi, like we just asked neighbors if they could help watch him, and they were so enthusiastic to help. And they're, very different than we were in so many ways, but it turned out to be just this magical relationship. And you just don't really know what someone might offer, and you don't know what you might be able to offer to someone else. So
I think that that's some of the best advice that I have gotten in response to that question, because I've asked it a few times. That's absolutely wonderful advice. I also wondered, as a member of the AAPI community, I know that the last 2 years have been particularly upsetting. And if you're open to it, I'd like for you to share your personal experiences of being a Japanese American woman living in rural California during this very divisive and kind of scary time.
Ooh, yeah, that's a big question.
It's a big question.
I have the privilege of being biracial. So I have a white mother and a Japanese American father. And I don't know if I'm able to do it, but it's been sort of a hard reckoning with my own identity. But I have often what I now kind of identify as I put my white self first. I'm very loud, and I don't know. I just sort of I realized I've created all these habits and how I engage in society that instantly show people I'm not like an other, which sucks. In so many ways that sucks. I've had this so much of my identity has been around protecting myself, whether or not I had to, I don't know. And I sometimes wish I could be a little bit, I wish I was able to more sort of put my Asian self forward. And what happens, I live in the whitest county in California, very white, the most diverse group of white people ever, but very white. And so more frequently than not, I am sort of like typecast by people. So I'll have people be like, I don't mind people asking me about my heritage at all or my identity at all, but it happens kind of frequently from like very well-meaning other groups and organizations, or, it's Asian History Month. Like, what should we do, Molly? And I'm like, I don't know. I mean, what do you want to do? Like, I can't speak on behalf of all Asian people, but sometimes when you're sort of the one in an area, that can happen. And I appreciate that allyship and that type of dialogue. But it's sort of funny that's like, I've sort of more experienced this awareness of my ethnicity from like sort of progressive channels than I do from like, any feeling of like hate or animosity or, but, I guess there's just always been things like on both sides that I've experienced. I never feel unsafe. I never feel as if someone is seeing me only for that. And that might just be because where I live is very, we're very close to Sacramento, which is a very diverse place. We're very, there's just a lot of groups overlapping in California and have been for a very long time. And maybe that like protects me a little bit from it. I have felt a little bit more of just a call to really embrace the pieces of my heritage and to not, unapologetically just be Japanese American and help remind people of the very recent history of what Japanese American community experienced. And, that like just wasn't long ago. I meet so many people who know very little about internment or don't realize how recent it was. And, I always am telling people like, oh, well, there's all these amazing places you can learn about it. And, I just feel a little bit more sort of called to like represent and keep alive that story, which is my story, and to share that story with other people and give it to other people. And so it can become their story. They know someone whose grandparents were in internment camps. And whatever your identity is, you've got to bring it to the forefront. And, it's part of that like cultural contribution you're going to have to wherever it is that you end up, no matter, whatever your heritage or life experiences. I mean, there's just so many things I think we could think about in terms of current politics where speaking up and saying, I experienced this, and we've got to do that, because we need all people to be safe in wherever we are. So
I'd love for you to describe your home and your land and your farmstead and how living in the country has impacted your physical, mental, and emotional health.
So where we are, we're nestled at about 2,300 feet in elevation. So as you move from the Central Valley of California up the Sierra Nevada, we're, sort of halfway up, and we're where the oak forest of the lower elevations meets the sort of ponderosa pine evergreen forest of the higher elevations. And anytime you're in a place where like two ecotypes are merging, overlapping, it's super diverse. And so we have the most incredible diversity of wildlife here. I mean, incredible songbirds all the time. We are just constantly seeing our neighbors in this ecosystem. And that is one of my most favorite parts of being here. I've been trying to like sort of zero in on what is it that I love, like on a very subconscious level, like what are the pieces that I kind of need? And I'm realizing like I need the quiet but I also need the noise. There's this amazing cacophony of nature and mostly it's birds. I mean, I realize like where I live, I can always hear birds, and that is so important to me. So we live on a little 10-acre parcel. We're sort of in like a kind of suburban in some ways. It's these smaller 10-acre and even smaller parcels in a little community called Chicago Park. we're between the North Fork of the American River and the South Fork of the Yuba River. And there's a lot of, it's all very hilly. There's no flat land. There's these beautiful tall pines all around, and then the deciduous oaks. And my little farm here is planted with a lot of different species that we can use as cut flowers. So there's a lot of different like flowering hedgerows and lavender plants. It's Mediterranean climate, and we can't grow a lot of the stuff that I was used to growing in the Bay Area because we get so many freezes, but there's still such a diversity of things that we can grow. We've done more and more clearing. And so to try and get back to sort of what I was referencing before, that lower density forest. So we're still in the forest, but we're trying to really look at sort of the ladder fuels around us and open up the land a little bit, where the land that we have access to. And we have, chickens wandering around. Oftentimes we have pigs wandering around. Yesterday we were chasing a little piglet all around right here that escaped. And I can see probably 4 other houses from my house, which feels like, it's so funny having grown up in a place where, there was about this much space between my house and my neighbor's house, and you just got so used to that. Now I can off in the distance see someone's house because there's no leaves on the oak trees, and I feel so exposed. When I first moved here, I remember that feeling. My sense of security was so flipped, because in a city, feeling safe was knowing that anywhere I was, I could sort of yell and somebody would help me. And so when I first moved here, I was like, how do I feel safe? And what if someone shows up at my house? What do I do? It was this weird experience that I asked neighbors, what's your plan? How do you feel safe? Now I'm like, we don't even know where the keys to our house are. We'll go away for 2 weeks and the house is just wide open. Don't put my address up because people will show up. But.
Definitely won't.
So right now we're experiencing this sort of driest start to a calendar year in recorded history. And so we're all praying for what they call a miracle March. We hope we get a lot of precipitation in March, but everyone is, we just see the writing on the wall. It's going to be a very dry year, which is going to pose huge challenges to agriculture and even bigger challenges to communities, because the threat of wildfire will be so drastic. And so that's kind of hanging over everyone right now. But, I've got a big vegetable garden, and then can't really see it now, but I have a big barn. And I have fields kind of around my barn where we grow our flowers. But we have this sort of network of fields on all of a couple adjacent properties where we have been able to find sort of flat places that have good sun exposure. And our farm is kind of spread out across the neighborhood. Our silos where we keep our feed are on a different property. Our pigs mostly live on a different property down the road. And so that's what it's like here.
That's amazing. And I mean, when I was there, so beautiful. And in conjunction with this, I will release photos from our tour there.
Oh, great. Yay.
Yeah. So the Mangalista pigs and the pines, and it was so beautiful there. And describing the oak trees with the pines, that was an ecological thing that I didn't know about. But I remember, because the first time I ever went to the Grass Valley region was when I came to photograph you. And I grew up in Northern California in Humboldt County, and it was just absolutely beautiful there. I have taken up over an hour of your time, but honestly, I could speak with you forever, but I'll leave it on one big lasting question, which is, what legacy do you want to leave behind for your son and for future generations? And then follow that up with any exciting things on the horizon from either a personal or business perspective that you'd like to share.
I thought about that question a lot. And the thing that kept coming back to me was, it's such a buzzy thing to say, but ecological symbiosis. I just think I want for my child and for our whole society and for all of us. I mean, when I think about this war, I mean, just what? This is so insane, because we are just a species in an ecosystem on a little speck in the universe. And I think so much of the grief and the trauma and the lack of a sense of purpose and our sort of lack of peace just in our lives is because we are detached from our ecosystem. Like we're just truly, there is like, it's not that we need to experience nature. It's not that we need to spend time in nature. It's that we are nature. We are integrated into a natural world. And whatever it is that you do in your life, I think if that can be a core experience, a core piece of your identity, we are like collectively moving towards this healing that I have hope for, that our species will survive on this planet in a peaceful and healthy way. And that, it's inside of us already, that feeling. So we just have to continually put ourselves in more and more relation with the world around us and with the non-human world, and the world that is not about money and owning and commodity. It's just about sunlight turning into plants, turning into food, turning into bodies, turning into, thoughts and art and music and dying and turning into compost and starting the whole cycle over. So that's what my hope for my child and for all of us is that we just connect with that we insert ourselves into that symbiosis, meaning like you have a role to play in that. Like you're not separate from it. You are connected to it. And so whether it's growing a plant on your windowsill or going out and laying on the ground, laying on the dirt. I mean, I think people just need to touch the dirt more, like touch the dirt, go touch the dirt. So that's my great deep hope. And then upcoming on the farm, I mean, another season, things are blooming. Flowers for Hospice once again is happening. And and I encourage anyone to, we're on social media and our website, reach out if you have questions or if you're in our area and you want to connect. And I don't really know personally. I think I'm going to try and continue my career supporting other farmers. I feel really sort of passionate and called to do that. And then, I think like the big sort of thought piece that is just so amazing to me right now is this idea of sort of fire in the Sierras and the role that humans play as people who can bring fire back to the landscape in a way that is safe. And so if you do live in anywhere in California, I think most ecosystems in California are sort of fire dependent. And so there's a lot more sort of research and dialogue and conversation and training about, bringing fire back to the land. And so I would just encourage people to look into that because it's one of those other sort of core elemental things that we feel so drawn to. And it's part of how we engage in the ecosystem.
I just so appreciate you taking the time to speak with me and to share your wisdom and to share your story and to share your passion. And I know I took a lot away from this conversation, and I know that listeners will as well.
Well, wonderful. It was great to be here with you here in the same space of the interwebs. And I just send you a lot of hope and peace and joy and best of luck with all your future creative ventures. Thanks for what you're doing for the world.
Thank you again, Molly, for joining us on the show. Some of my key takeaways from this episode. There is so much healing that can come by getting your hands in the soil. The act of growing is good for your mind, your body, and your soul. And so much can be gained from reconnecting to the earth in that way. When moving to a small community, give people the benefit of the doubt before rushing to conclusions. Relationships are built over time through mutual respect and acceptance. You don't have to have the same political or religious beliefs in order to build a lasting friendship. For those living in less diverse communities, be very mindful of inadvertently othering people. It is emotionally exhausting and frustrating to be constantly asked to speak on behalf of an entire group of people. And that goes across the board for race, sexual identity, class, and the like. There are many unique pathways into farming. Just like any pursuit, don't compare yourself to others. Each farmer needs to figure out their own recipe for success. Don't consider yourself a failure if you aren't able to make farming your full-time pursuit. I know many people working as part-time farmers, and they're still farmers. And working at someone else's farm is still being a farmer. Be open to exploring different opportunities to create something that works for you. Finally, we need beauty. Beauty is not impractical, but vital. Flowers are a beautiful example of something that brings so much value and joy into the world in unexpected ways. I think Molly has finally showed me the true power of giving flowers. And I hope that anybody listening today will consider either donating to her Flowers for Hospice project or setting up one on their own in their community. Hi, friends. Thank you so much for tuning in to another episode of the Urban Exodus podcast. This project is made possible by listener support. I do this work because the people I meet through this project give me hope for the future. And I think we could all use a little more motivation and inspiration in this current moment in history. All of the work that I do through this project is to encourage people to believe in themselves and to work towards a better future for their community and for our planet. Your continued support will keep this passion project running. The easiest way to contribute is to click the support button on the top of urbanexodus.com and pledge any amount that you like. Or you can buy an ad spot in an upcoming episode, shop our online store of rurally made goods, or join our Patreon community for access to bonus features, rapid-fire interviews with podcast guests, videos, live presentations, and so much more. Visit patreon.com/urbanexodus. Another way to support is by giving us a 5-star rating on iTunes and recommending Urban Exodus to your friends. Thank you again for helping me continue to do this work. I couldn't do this without all of you. You can find Urban Exodus on Instagram and Facebook at The Urban Exodus. To read more in-depth features on folks who ditched the city and went country, visit urbanexodus.com. Until next time, I'm Alyssa Hessler, and this is The Urban Exodus.